Before I ever knew his name, I was dead walking my way.
Stuck in all my sin and shame, I was destined for the grave.
If you've been searching,
And if you've been hurting,
then call out his name.
name.
Nobody but Jesus. He's still healing minds.
Rescuing the blind.
He's always on time.
Jesus.
What's up, y'all, and welcome to the New Life Experience. If this is your first time joining us, I just want to say we are so glad that you've chosen to worship with us through the studying of God's Word and through speaking of His goodness, talking about His goodness, and things of that nature. If you've been with us the last couple of weeks, you know we've been talking through Acts 22. We've been talking through some church camp reflections, and as I promised, this week we're going to dive into a little bit about Mormonism. And honestly, depending on how this video does, this might be something that we dive into a little bit more, or something that we just kind of cap at one episode. So we will see, but let's dive into this. Okay, so this is important, and I'm literally just going to talk through this. I don't want this to be formal. I'm sitting down, I'm just reading through some notes, some things that I took away. So I go to Salt Lake City, and in this time, we get to go to the temple, the tabernacle thing right next to it, kind of the garden. We got to speak to some LDS members, but I think one of the biggest things was we got to go into the history of the LDS Church, and we also got to speak to Sandra Bullock, I believe is her name. Maybe not Bullock. Miss Sandra. Anyways, it's Brigham Young's great-great-granddaughter. And so this is a woman who has really done a lot of research into the LDS Church, what it looks like, what it consists of, and things of that nature. So with that, as we stepped into the LDS Church History Museum, here's some things that I noticed. So we step into this first room, and, well, there's a little bit of a hallway. We step into this main auditorium. We sit down, and it's here's the account of Joseph Smith's story. Now, one of the interesting things to note is when we go in here, the video, it talks about, it's a compilation of everything that is talked about from all these different years of what this vision that Joseph Smith had included. So it's not hey, here's what did happen. It's hey, we've pulled little bits and pieces from all these different records and we've smushed them together into one video, which creates a lot of questions because not all of the accounts were actually the same. And it wasn't necessarily they said things that were kind of significantly different. When you look at the Gospels, even John, which isn't included in the the normal God. There's three Gospels that are pretty similar, and then there's John, and John is typically included outside of that. But when you put John into it, it's still not even the same as the account of Joseph Smith's testimony. So here's some interesting notes as we listen to this video. I started taking notes on things and discrepancies that I saw within this and that I thought were important to note. All right, here we go. Number one, Joseph Smith's testimony is done in complete isolation. See, here's the thing about Joseph Smith's testimony. When he goes out into the woods and when he hears from God, it is in complete isolation. There's no one there. It's literally just him. And so he claims to get this vision from God, and he's you know what? I'm the only one here. And not only that, but he didn't bring his testimony before anyone else. He took years to process this by himself in a way where he was completely alone. There was no community. There were no pastors. There was no one to be around him and fact check him. With this, his parents and himself were also not plugged into a church. So this dude was kind of just off and claimed to have this vision. It's also, I think, something that's concerning to note is that this is also based on his first audible prayer. This is what it said. This is all according to the LDS Church History Museum. This was all according, they said this was just based on the first time that he prayed. The first time he prayed, he gets this vision. I don't know about y'all, but as I was learning to pray, there were definitely some things that I didn't understand about prayer that I kind of had to grow into. Hey, God's probably not going to tell you to go buy a Lego set. He might, but you don't necessarily hear a lot of that happening. What God says is for His glory. And for your good, which is His glory. So, knowing that this was based on a heavily focused on works and how works play into the equation, so it would make sense that Mormonism would actually be based off of a lot of James, because James is very works-oriented, and the LDS Church factors works into salvation, thus making it totally wrong. But anyways, okay, so it's Sandra Tanner. I don't know who Sandra Bullock is. But anyway, Sandra Tanner was the person that we got to sit down with. And so we got to sit down with her. We talked for like 2 hours. And I audio recorded it. I plugged it into ChatGPT. I said, Chat, would you give me some notes from this audio recording? And so here's what we've got. So I'm going to walk us through this. Here we go. So Joseph Smith was 14 when he had his first vision. Now, as you start to do work into looking into the timeline and different things, you notice this is actually a really debated fact. Recently, the LDS Church has come out and been like, no, he was 19. And they do that to try to give him more ground to stand on, because you're going to believe a 19-year-old before you're going to believe a 14-year-old. However, maybe it's vice versa. But anyways, I think it was vice versa. He was 19. They're trying to say that he was 14. But as you look at timelines and as you honestly find LDS historians and ask them about it, they can't prove that. So he was actually 14. So the original thing, he steps out into the woods, he prays for this forgiveness of sins, and then only one, and this is again where the LDS Church actually has something, or the LDS Church History Museum has something different. Only one, either Jesus or God, appears to him. When you step into the museum, you get Joseph Smith, he's on his knees and he's praying, and a human Jesus and a human God show up, which is already heresy to put God into man. That's not how that works. Jesus was a man, so depict him. That's why I have no problem with The Chosen. Jesus was a dude. I think for you to be like, no, that's like heresy. I think you're kind of missing the humanness of Jesus. God as a man, I have a different problem with. So they characterize God as a man, which is just really another issue. But anyways, according to his first testimony, only one appears. There's no mention of church confusion or which denomination to join, which is also kind of mentioned later on. The 1838 account now, which is what the LDS narrative includes, is that the Father and the Son both appeared, and that Joseph Smith had problems with all of the existing denominations. There are two, like the 1832 account, 1838 account are saying different things. They actually withheld the 1832 account up until the 1960s because they faced a lot of pressure to do so. So the official story takes place in the 1820 revival. But see, actually, again, what's interesting is that during this revival, it's a very spiritual revival. It's not necessarily just Christianity, according to where Joseph Smith was. So Joseph Smith is in this area where they're actually doing a whole lot of occult practices and witchcraft. If you've ever heard of a watering stick, I'll let you look that up. I'm not going to talk about it for the sake of time. But he's using a watering stick and all this stuff that's kind of weird. And so the idea of getting a vision from something that you might attribute to God, he's not plugged into a church. He's not around community. He gets a vision after being engaged with the occult. I'm going to argue that this is satanic. And then obviously when you look at how this develops and how this is leading millions to a Christless place, I think you further a point that this is unfortunately a demonic encounter, which the enemy has used to lead thousands of millions away. So anyways, 1823, Joseph Smith tells his first friend about this hidden record. He doesn't mention explicitly that it's an angel. The LDS claim that Joseph visited annually on the equinox, a specific date, until actually receiving the place in 1827. But see, here's the thing. As you look between 1823 and 1827, you notice that this is actually a really sketchy timeline. The church ties these visits to folk magic, like money digging days, which is actually crazy interesting. So the church is yeah, he was engaged in some pretty whack stuff. Historians say there's no solid evidence for annual angelic visits, but that's what they claim. In 1830, the Book of Mormon is officially published and the LDS Church is formally organized. Early missionary work begins, and many of the converts, many of these people who are stepping into the LDS Church, are from a magical or a charismatic background. So think money digging, seer stones, different things. Historian D. Michael Quinn, who was later excommunicated by the church, argues that the first 100 converts were influenced by folk magic, which made angelic visitations and supernatural claims more believable. These people were led astray. This is where it's actually really interesting when you start looking into this. You start doing research, what you notice is hey, this stuff is actually pretty whack. Pretty crazy stuff. So let's look at some movement and theological evolution. Okay, so Mormons begin in New York City. They move down to Ohio, down to Missouri, and then I believe they move up to Illinois and then over to Salt Lake City. The early theological beliefs are influenced by the disciples of Christ and the Campbellite movement. They took communion every Sunday. They believed in baptism by immersion, and then they believed in restorationist ideology. So the church had gone into apostasy, and it was time to resurrect something new. Mormonism shifts from magic-based beliefs to like charismatic revivalist theology. So what you notice about the LDS church, kind of as you go back in history, is they're always trying to communicate to the people that are gonna listen and that are going to accept them the most. And we've noticed this a lot recently. And so they didn't allow people of color to be in the priesthood until the 1960s, when the civil rights stuff changed in 1964, I believe. You notice they didn't. There's some other crazy thing, I can't quite remember what it is, but for that reason, it will be interesting to see if they become LGBT affirming in the years to come because of the social pressure to do so. So keep an eye out. I think that's pretty interesting. All right, let's look at this. Polygamy and LDS leadership. So a lot of times if you ask an LDS leader, hey, so tell me about polygamy, they'll be like, oh, that's just a total smudge, kind of on a record. Super wrong. Here's the thing though, they claimed that they heard from God, and God was like, do polygamy, like this is great. They'll try to kind of wipe over it. For example, you get to this stone. We went to this place. It was called This Is the Place National Park. It's where Brigham Young shows up, and he's like, this is where God has decided for us to be. And you go up there, and there's a statue of Brigham Young, and it's got his wife's name on it. And then, just on the front, looking at the front, and then the guy that we're walking around with goes, hey, watch this. And we walk over to the side, and there's 3 more wives. And we walk around to the back, and there's another wife, and then we walk to the other side, and there's 2 or 3 more. See, here's the thing. They know that polygamy happened. They're trying to keep it pretty under wraps. So, Joseph Smith had 30 to 40 wives. That's kind of a lot of wives. He had 30 to 40. 14 were already married. He also married 14 teenage girls, and 2 of them were 14 years old when he married them, which is pretty crazy. So, this was long denied, and here's the thing. As you look for that kind of information now, what you'll notice is it's just buried in footnotes. Like, you're not actually gonna be able to find this kind of stuff on the LDS website unless you do some like crazy digging, because they try to hide this. All right, Brigham Young, he had 55 wives, 16 of whom he had 56 children. So kind of crazy number stuff, but many women left alone on farms. So it was like, he wasn't actually about supporting widows, as what like they would say. They were like, oh yeah, like he's just about supporting the widows, but that's not really what we see. Brigham Young Jr., which is Sandra's ancestors, her, I guess, great-grandfather, he had 5 wives. He married Sandra's great-grandmother when she was 17, and Brigham Jr. was about 50. So what you notice about this polygamy marriage stuff is it's pretty crazy, All right, we're going to continue to scroll down here. I kind of wish that you all could see this. I might post it in the description. We'll see. Here we go. Conversion. Okay, we'll look at this. So, as you look, this will make it a little shorter too. We'll just see kind of how this lands. Sandra obviously came from the bloodline of Brigham Young. She knows all of this stuff because she's done research. Like, she's been willing to go into the roots and into the grass and into the weeds. She was born LDS. Her great-grandfather was was the dude, Brigham Young. He's got a freaking university named after him. He was the dude. She takes time to do research and actually dive into what all of this looks like. So here's what she does a lot of research on Mormonism. She's one of the top critics of the LDS Church. Here's the thing. There's no archaeological or manuscript evidence for the Book of Mormon. They have nothing. When you look for evidence for the Bible, you'll notice we have manuscripts in like the Dead Sea Scrolls. We have all these books written from like way back in the day. They've been translated, written up thousands of years since like the Old Testament, canonized, New Testament canonized together. All of these things, you don't find that for the Book of Mormon. You can't find gold tablets anywhere. You can't find that seer stone that he actually used to look into this hat. He wasn't even the tablets. When he was translating the tablets, it was under a sheet on the other side of the table. He was using a seer stone and a hat. Again, all very demonic, in my opinion. There's no archaeological evidence for the Book of Mormon. The Bible has maps, it has manuscripts, it has archaeology. When you look for these things, the Book of Mormon has none. It's all just attributed as truth. There is no historical backing whatsoever. There's not even a location to put on a map. When you open the Bible, if you flip to the back, I'm not sure if this one has it. This one does. Okay, so when you flip to the back, it has a map. It has a map in it. Why? Because the Bible is true. It's a historical book as well as, like the living Word of God, all these things. It has all this information in it. It has maps because it's true. The Book of Mormon doesn't have that. Here's the thing. If you read the Book of Mormon, the doctrine... here's a question that Sandra posed to us. If you read the Book of Mormon, and it's true, hypothetically, what doctrine does it teach you that would make you a Mormon? The answer is very little. Most of the LDS doctrine actually comes from later sources and later books. So, also the Book of Mormon, looks back to a lot of the Bible. And so, also, just a few doctrinal things that are a little sketchy. Mormonism also believes in like two different gods. In the Old Testament, there's Elohim, which is God the Father, and then there's Jehovah, which is kind of like Jesus. Physical nature of God, they believe in not really the Trinity, but multiple gods instead. Here's the thing, LDS interpretations are inconsistent and unverifiable. As you look into LDS history, as you look into the documentation of this religion, you notice that there's a ton of flaws. Like this stuff doesn't add up. The math just doesn't math with this religion. And so maybe you're an LDS person, in which I would love to talk further about this. If you have some questions, like let's research it together. If you are a Christian or an agnostic or an atheist or whatever kind of approach season you might be coming from, allow this to just show you that it's really important to do research. And as you research, here's the thing, like I've read so much like research about this book because I want to make sure what I'm believing is actually true. And here's the thing, as you look and you do research and you study, it all proves to be true. Everything in this book proves to be true. When you do that with other religions, when you do that with Islam, when you do that with Mormonism, when you do that with Hinduism and Buddhism, what you notice is their arguments begin to fall apart. And it's not consistent and it doesn't work. And so, anyways, with that, I hope this was, I don't know if I would say encouraging, but I hope it was eye-opening. Here's the thing, we believe that the truth changes things. And so I hope that this brought some light to the truth. And so obviously, depending on how this video lands, there might be more to kind of weed through and talk through. But I hope that helps a little bit. So love you guys. I'll see you next week.